of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80. Yet their pride is but toil and trouble. Life is so fleeting. So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom. Mark the blameless person, behold the upright, for there is posterity for the man of peace. Ish Shalom. Surely God will ransom my soul from the grave and receive me. The Lord redeems the souls of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. The dust returns to the earth as it was, but the spirit returns to God who gave it. My friends, we are here today with a heavy heart, with a great sorrow, to pay tribute and last respects to a man who is very dear to many, if not all of us, Robert Mazer, but also to give us an opportunity to celebrate his life, the life of an Ish Shalom, a man of peace. Bob was not a big talker. Those of us who knew him would rarely hear him espouse even his own feelings in words. Bob was the kind of person, humble, determined, set in his convictions, but rather than speak about them, he did them. He was, as the Mishnah or rabbis teach, emor ma'at va'aseh harbe. Speak little and do a lot. When I asked Claire to sum up his relationship with her, it's interesting what she said. She said he was a true gentleman, and I appreciated his love and the respect that he gave me and the partnership that we had in making decisions in life. Yes, Bob was a gentleman, always impeccably dressed. In fact, I could always tell when Bob Mazer was at a meeting by the cologne that he wore. I knew Bob was there. He was a gentleman. And he swept Claire off her feet. And she swept him off his bachelor feet. From the time that he saw her at a dance and befriended her, stayed in touch with her from afar, 57 years ago. But Bob was much more than a gentleman who dressed well. Bob was a mensch. I don't have a definition for mensch. Ish Shalom, a person of peace, a simple, good person with what we would call a gute neshama, a good heart. The kind of person who, for a friend, would give them the shirt off his back. What he would do for friends was beyond any kind of measure. To help someone if they needed his help. And for me, if I may speak personally, having known and loved Bob for over 30 years, I know for me and for many others, as I look out here, I see them. He was a father figure. He was a father not only to his children, he was a father figure to so many others. He believed in us. He believed in me. He supported me at a critical time in my life. And he did the same for so many others. Every time I would see Bob, he would ask me, number one, how's that daughter of yours who does the acrobatics? Because he and Claire would come over for Shabbat dinner. And I had a daughter at the time, I mean, I still do, thank God, who would do acrobatics, gymnastics. He would always be asking about her. And then whenever we would part, he would say, now you take care of yourself now. Caring about others, not about himself. Bob was a mensch. He was also, of course, a real family man, as we will hear in a few moments too. He was a patriarch who sat at the round table as the king knight in shining armor with his family, with his children. He was the leader of the family, father to Neal and Cliff and Julie and Leslie. Proud grandfather to Ari, Amy, Ellie, Benjamin, Eli, Benjamin, Mitchell, Corey, Ella, and Andrew. He loved his grandchildren. He loved his children. And I think that in the latter years of his life, he was able to love them even more. And he was able to cherish the grandchildren. He was so proud of the grandchildren. He really loved you. You were everything to him. And I think that in his earlier years as a parent, he was away a lot. He worked hard. He had an incredible work ethic. He wasn't born into success or wealth. He worked hard, was the only one who went to college from his family, served in the Navy. And his desire over all his years, as far as I knew, was to succeed so that his children would have it better than he did. So that his grandchildren would have it easier than he did. That was his mission in life, to provide for them. And he succeeded. After he sold his business, he was able to enjoy, I think, those parts of life that he didn't in his earlier years. Oh, how he was proud of his White Sox. How much pleasure it brought him to fulfill his dream from his childhood to own a baseball team. I remember one of the first times I met him, he gave me one of his cards with a picture of him with a helmet. I thought he was a player. And maybe in his mind and in his dreams he was, vicariously. He would open up his box, not only to me and to my children, he would bring the staff of the fellowship to the box, bring in kosher food to accommodate me and us. He loved his team. And as he had time and got older, he got more involved in Jewish life. Bob was not an observant person. Some would say he was not a religious person. I would differ with that. I think he was profoundly religious, but not observant. But he was one of the proudest identifying Jews that I ever knew. What he did in his lifetime, even in his last 20 years, for Israel, for the security of the state of Israel, very few people have succeeded in doing. His involvement and leadership with AIPAC, with the organization that I started 30 years ago, he was at the very first meeting, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, begun the Standard Club 30 years ago, and Bob was a founding member, and then later for 15 years chairman of this organization that is now the largest philanthropy in Israel. If you wanted to goad, and of course, his partnership with Claire in the work of Ort, that meant so much to him, if only because it meant so much to her. And if you wanted to test Bob's tolerance level, goad him, just tell him you were a liberal Democrat. My friends, there are others who are going to speak and talk about his life. I came from Israel to say goodbye to a dear friend. Bob's life, to those who encountered it, to encounter him was a special gift. He was a model of an Ish Shalom, a man of peace, simple, without words, but a doer with a strong work ethic, had his convictions, stuck by them, never forgot, especially in his latter years, those he loved so much in his family, always standing with his friends and giving birth to future through his discipleship of so many people, myself included. I know how much we will all miss him, his family, his friends who were touched and inspired by his life. We pray that God will shelter his spirit under the canopy of his love and that he will rest in peace. I'd like to call on Amy, granddaughter of Bob, to say a few words.
Okay. This was written by my brother Mitch, who's in Australia right now and couldn't be here. Just before your 90th birthday in August, Papa, Amy and I asked you, what is it like to have grandchildren? You lit up, put on the sweetest smile, and answered in the most sincere, soft voice, "It's the most wonderful thing." Papa, you were the most wonderful grandfather. I will never forget that exchange. I was blessed to have my grandpa as a role model. He was disciplined and embodied certain core values I would like to share today. These are things he stood for, loved, and passed on to those who got to know him. Family. My grandpa was caring and would do anything to help his family succeed. Loyalty. He had tremendous, unwavering loyalty and concern for my grandma, our Nana. He always greeted her in the most loving way when she entered a room, even if earlier that night Nana didn't let him have his favorite dessert. "Hi, darling," Papa would say. I can still hear it. Education. Even as a standout athlete in high school, he knew the importance of hitting the books, as he would say. And later in life, he made sure his children and grandchildren could attend the finest schools. Tzedakah. Papa gave and gave some more. Mail that most people consider junk mail, he would open, read, think about, and oftentimes donate. Once I asked him why he gave to so many charities, and he replied, "Because I can." Politics in Israel. Papa was a staunch supporter of Israel and always remained informed on current events. When Amy and I recently asked him what is the most important thing to do in life, he replied, "Know what is going on in the world and support your community." Lastly, he loved baseball. Rain or shine, he would go to White Sox games, sit in his seat with lineup card in hand, having his undivided attention on the game and surrounded by the family and friends he loved. For me, I know I would not be as passionate about baseball as I am today without his influence. I probably would not be in Australia playing right now. Growing up, when my sister's mom and I would visit in Highland Park, Papa and I would play baseball in the backyard. I always remember his pitching motion when he used to throw me batting practice. I will always remember playing catch. I will always remember that you taught me how to play. Just yesterday, I played in the game, and I thought about you before every inning, before every at-bat, and before every pitch. I knew you were here with me. When I play baseball, I still have you. When I do anything according to your values and the lessons you taught me, I still have you. When I left for Australia, I knew it might be the last time I would see you, but now I know I will always have you. We will always have you. We love you, Papa. And this is from my sister Ella, who is also out of the country. Okay. Papa, as challenging as it is for me to be here in Nepal, literally on the other side of the world, I also know that by being here and discovering who I am, I'm honoring your wishes. You always encouraged us to discover our own passions, and by example, you taught us how to pursue them with that incredible Bob Mazer type of focus. Most people know of your intense focus and passion for Mazer chemicals, Israel, politics, and your beloved White Sox. I know of your other passions, those little things that you would surround yourself with throughout your life. Black licorice, dry sack sherry, obsession cologne, and I can name a couple as well: chocolate cake, Tootsie Rolls, jelly beans, chocolate shakes, anchovies, olives. I could go on for a while. But I always think of you when I come across these things later in my life. Most important, I will remember your intense focus and love for our Nana. I will never forget the loving way you would call her out whenever you felt she was asserting herself a bit too strongly by saying, "Oh, Claire." I will also remember the way you responded to all of my ideas and exciting events in my life. You always responded with the same words, which you always offered in the most sincere and loving way. "Oh, wonderful Ella." Papa, I thank you for offering me all of these important memories, which I will always hold close to my heart. I love you, and I will always miss you. Love, Ella. I love you, Papa. I'll miss you a lot.
Thank you so much from the next generation that he influenced. I'd like to ask Marietta, who was longtime devoted friend, secretary at Mazer Chemicals, to come up and asked to say a few words.
First of all, I'd like to give my sincere condolences. I'd like to give my sincere condolences to Mrs. Mazer and the family. Yes.
I can't hear you.
Oh,
No, it doesn't.
oh,
It's fine. Just
okay, speak up. Okay, my name is Marietta Duke, and I worked for Mr. Mazer for many years. I first met him in 1972 when I was referred to him by his then secretary, who was leaving town because of her husband's transfer. Mr. Mazer interviewed me, he hired me, and I became the 19th person on the Mazer payroll. There are so many memories I have of how generous Mr. Mazer was to me and his employees, and how concerned he was about our children and our families. He made sure that if someone was out because of an extended illness or injury, their paycheck would continue because they had to support their family. Mr. Mazer was very compassionate and caring. After my son went to college in Washington State, I fostered a 2-month-old baby girl, and a year later, her newborn brother. I didn't know how that was going to affect my job, as kids get sick, and because of my responsible position, I didn't want to lose a lot of time from work. I explained the situation to Mr. Mazer, and he said to me that those kids come first. So whenever I had to take off to take them to the doctor, I was to do so. He himself was a family man, and he assured all of us that families come first. Every year, Mr. Mazer would give his employees an expensive paid picnic in the summer and a Christmas party in December, which were held at the finest places, including the Birchwood Country Club. That was his way of showing his appreciation to us for our loyalty to him and the company. One year, he treated all of us and our immediate families to an outing at Great America in Gurnee. Needless to say, it was a day to remember. We employees could not match Mr. Mazer's generosity, but I believe it was on his 60th birthday, I'm not sure, that we planned a surprise birthday party for him. He was overwhelmed and taken aback and all but cried because we thought enough of him to personally expense this affair to honor him. I remember when Mr. Mazer had heart surgery, and of course, being his secretary, I went down to the hospital a couple of times a week to keep him abreast of the company business. I asked the nurse which way to his room, and she instructed me that it was down the hall on the right. Well, I walked down that hall twice, and each time I looked in that room, I saw a man, but it was not Mr. Mazer. On my third trip, I again looked into the room, and a gentleman said, "Marietta, it's Bob Mazer." I was so embarrassed that I didn't recognize him, as he did not have on his toupee, and I had never seen him without it. It took me a long time to get over the embarrassment, but he never mentioned a thing about it. When Mr. Mazer retired from the company 3 years following the acquisition with PPG, we kept in touch. Even though the last time I saw him was at his 80th birthday party, we kept in touch, cards and phone calls. Never missed a year of calling him on his birthday. He loved to reminisce about the days at Mazer Chemicals, and I would keep a roster of the people with whom he employed, and go down that list to mention every name so that he could bring up whatever he remembered about that person. It was the highlight of his day. On Mr. Mazer's 89th birthday, my memory failed me, and instead of calling him on August the 11th, I called him on August the 23rd, the year in which he was born. When I said happy birthday to him, he politely said, "Marietta, my birthday was on August the 11th, not the 23rd. Again, I was embarrassed, and we both had a good laugh. To Mrs. Mazer and the family, he was a man of great integrity, compassion, and generosity. A one-of-a-kind man to work for who could not be forgotten. I will greatly miss him, sending him letters, birthday cards, and making phone calls to him. I have been blessed to have known and worked with Robert R. Mazer. May he rest in peace." Thank you.
Thank you, Marietta. And finally, Cliff, Bob's son.
Sorry. This is my son Eli. It's the same with or without the glasses. My dad was like an M&M candy. My dad was like an M&M candy and also was a great lover of jelly beans. He used to smell like Old Spice until he switched to Obsession by Calvin Klein. To me, he always seemed unusually big and strong, but smelled really, really good. While my father might appear hard on the outside, perhaps even stern or stoic to those who didn't know him, he was really much softer and sugary sweet on the inside, just like his M&Ms and his jelly beans. He was 90 years old on August 11th, and I'm grateful for being able to spend his birthday with him at the ballpark, eating chocolate cake with jelly beans and watching the White Sox lose again. Sorry, Jerry. Death and mortality for very manly men and very tough cookies like my dad is a very difficult concept to grasp. A part of me thought that he would live forever, like a big oak tree in our front yard on Berkeley Road in Highland Park. When I think of my father, I think of his overall stout, oak tree-like physique, his strength and athleticism, his standing and his leadership among men of considerable status, and a kind of masculine pride and dapper, well-dressed appearance that fit him to a T. His clothes closet, like the man himself, was highly organized, well-engineered, and ship-shape at all times. Maybe even a little anal. My dad epitomized old-school masculinity and personal values. He didn't use a computer. He didn't like to be driven in a car by other people, and he liked his hamburgers and his steaks charred on the outside, but medium rare and tender on the inside. Again, sort of like his personality. Of course, if my mother let him, he probably also would have liked a baked potato on the side with sour cream, and definitely something chocolate for dessert. In general, my father saw the world as pretty black and white, and you needed to decide which side you were on, or at least which side you supported with great conviction. He did not equivocate, and unlike some people and some politicians, he was not a flip-flopper. Being a man of principles and purpose, my father didn't have much use for abstract art or avant-garde theater unless it was ballet, opera, or Broadway shows like Oklahoma and West Side Stories. He really loved that stuff, and jazz too. The clarity of his tastes and his hyper-masculine preferences sometimes made me question my more complex and contradictory personality. For example, I can easily confuse myself with opposing philosophical arguments about just about anything and everything, and I still sometimes lose my car keys, my wallet, and sometimes even my car. But my dad always left his keys in the same place, in the right dish. And when it came to sports, he chose a side to play on, and then he swung the bat or the racket as hard as he could. Like his grandson Mitch, he usually made contact, and he rarely struck out. I won't say that he didn't ever believe in bunts or drop shots, but honestly, he rarely used them. like I said, he hit the ball of life very hard, fast, and low. And he played to win. And I know that because it took me a really long time to beat him in tennis. I mean, he was practically in a wheelchair by the time I beat him. And then he almost beat me. Over the last couple of months at home in Atlanta, I thought of my dad very often and also about his approaching fate. And one day my eyes caught a particular shelf in my son Eli's room that displays the painted glass jars that my wife Rona decorated before she passed away in 1999. She was half my father's age, only 45 years old, which is pretty young. Rona, like myself and my mother, was into art and into creative expression. I probably learned from my mother and the Glantz side of the family about self-expression and creativity. But for me, it didn't really blossom until later in life. As a child growing up in Highland Park, my brother Neal showed a really early innate aptitude for drawing, design, sculpture, pottery making, photography, cooking, and completing very sophisticated ship models. And at the time, I was very busy playing with my plastic army men in the basement or the backyard, whom I would group together in like Custer's Last stance, and then blow them up with lighter fluid, cherry bombs, fireworks, whatever I could get my hands on. I remember at the same time my dad working long hours, difficult hours back then, building his chemical business from the very ground up. When he was at home, he sat in his office upstairs and dutifully paid mountains of bills and wrote reams upon reams of checks, carefully addressing and licking the stamps by hand, each and every single one of them. Now Julie has to do it, and I appreciate that. His handwriting, my father, was atrocious, worse than most physicians. Meanwhile, our basement on Brittany Road was often on fire, either due to a wayward chemistry experiment or more likely me lighting one of Neal's sophisticated and complex ship models on fire and then blowing it up. The thing was that after watching so many World War II movies, I thought that that's what men were supposed to do. Work, do scientific experiments, and blow stuff up. I didn't really learn about the other side of life or the human psyche until much later, until after I was married. My wife, Rona, and I would go into the basement of our big East Cobb house in Marietta, Georgia, which I continually renovated into about 89,000 different bonus rooms for no reason. And she would paint those glass jars while I would spray paint everything in the universe, including probably Ming vases, making them absolutely worthless. Like my maternal grandmother Lillian, my mother's mother, and her gold spray paint obsession. I didn't know that antiques were supposed to remain untouched and left to their own natural aging and patina. I learned that on Antique Roadshow, a little late. And I certainly didn't know about my own shadow and why opposites often attract in art, in science, and sometimes even in relationships and marriages. I think maybe my dad just skipped over all the complicated psychological, artistic, and theoretical stuff, and just absolutely positively loved and adored my mother unconditionally. That's something most people remember about him. He worked hard, he swung the racket hard, and he loved my mother unconditionally. All I really mean to say here is that my father, Robert Mazer, modeled a lot of good things for many people who, like him, grew into mighty oak trees with a passion for living life, doing the right thing, and pursuing one's lifelong dreams. I've been writing a lot about my father lately, and it helps me to cope and appreciate him even more. Not only is writing one of my passions, but it makes me realize even more which parts of me are like my dad, which parts of me are like my mom, and maybe even which parts of me are Lawrence Hyken, or Rona Hertz, or maybe even Yul Brenner. When I look at Rona's many colored painted vases now, I remember her too, and her courageous attempts to come to grips with her life, her cancer, and her eventual journey to the afterlife, depending on what one chooses to believe. The last thing that Rona ate before she died was a banana popsicle. The last thing my father wanted to eat before he died in my arms on Friday night was oatmeal and a banana. I choose to believe that Rona's soul and my father's soul is still around and can be used to support my belief that we're all here for a reason. To grow like sturdy, strong oak trees, to learn important life lessons, to teach, to love, and to help other people in some special or unique way that God meant us to, all of us. My dad was like an M&M candy and also was a great lover of jelly beans. I love you, Dad. Here's one of Rona's vases. I filled it up with M&Ms and jelly beans just for you. I love you.
Please rise for the concluding prayer of the Kel Mole Rachmi. El Mole Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hahamtzeh Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina B'mahalot Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohar Arakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Reuven Ben Levi Shalach Lo Lamo Bavor She'anachnu Mitpalim Bad Haskarat Nishmato Began Eden Tehei Menuchato Lachen Bal Harachamim Yastirehu Beseter Knafav Lolamim Bisror Bitzror Achaimet Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'yanuach B'shalom al mishkavo V'nomar Amen. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of thy presence, among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, unto the soul of Reuven ben Levi, Robert Mazer, who has gone unto eternity, and in whose memory we offer prayers and charity. May his repose be in paradise. May the Lord of mercy bring him under the cover of his wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May the Lord be his possession. May his repose be peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could kindly ask anyone who served in the United States Armed Forces to please stand next to Mr. Mazer's casket at this time. So anyone who served in the United States Armed Forces, please stand next to his casket. The entombment service will continue at Shalom Memorial Park, located at 1700 West Rand Road in Arlington Heights. The family will be together at the Mazer residence at 800 North Michigan Avenue, apartment 5601 in Chicago. The family will be together today until 9 p.m. Valet parking is available. The information for memorial contributions, as well as a map to the family's residence, you'll find on the service folder that you received upon entering the chapel. If you did not get one, we have them as you exit the chapel. Also, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who will be driving in the funeral procession, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we will be providing many of the cars with a flag that will be affixed to the top portion of your car. We'll have a car in the back of the funeral procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. And for your own personal safety, I strongly recommend that no one is speaking on your cellular phones while driving to the cemetery. Also, in memory of Mr. Mazer, as you leave the chapel, we do have M&Ms and jelly beans for you to take.